know we're talking a lot today, David, about that word purpose. And even the word purpose, where is the real purpose driving you from? Is it from an inner purpose of what you really believe yourself? Or is it a purpose that's been delivered to you by blinkers or societal pressure or expectations of others that you are living, working, or serving? In terms of that purpose and that energy, what is really driving you? Are being driven from an internal reason or dragged as a result of what society expects?
We hear so much today in media, on social media as well, about the importance of knowing your purpose, finding your why. It's a topic that's come up before on the podcast, but we're going to be approaching it from a slightly different angle today, because where I think so many of us get things misaligned, confused, off the track on this kind of subject is that starting assumption that your purpose has to also be your work. It can be, certainly, and if you're lucky enough to be in that position, that's great, but it's not the only answer to the question. Today we're going to be talking about leadership, of course, as we always do, as well as finding that purpose, why it's important, how it links to things like happiness and managing our careers and getting the most out of all of these things, and the role that leaders have to play in these things for the people that they are leading. We're also going to touch on things like the differences between leadership, management, and being a boss. As you know, if you've heard any previous episodes, I have pretty strong views about that already. And joining me to help shine light on some of these subjects is my guest this week, Mr. Chris Wilson. Chris is a coach, a trainer, a speaker, facilitator, mentor. He's also the host of his own podcast, and he's all about helping you make more impact with your voice via speaking, connecting, listening. He's had an interesting and varied career so far. He's got some highly relevant life experiences as well, and ultimately he's just a great storyteller. So that's going to come through from this conversation, I'm sure. Not one to miss out on, so stick around.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Chris, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Thanks for being with us today.
Pleasure to be here, David.
Yeah, we'll start off with pushing you in at the deep end, metaphorically, I hope. Tell us a bit about yourself, your business, what you do, why you do it.
Well, you've already started pushing you into the deep end. You're using words to describe a situation, which is what I do. I manage people's impact and influence using the power of the gift of voice.
And your career so far, how did you end up doing that? Because I know there's an interesting story here.
Yeah, it's a checkered one, to be honest. 27 years in full-time self-employment, and that's gone through various gates and hurdles and a few dips and hollows along the way. So where do you want to start? Do you want to start last corporate job, or do you want to work on any one of those hurdles or hollows?
I mean, I usually say it's best to start at the beginning, but I mean, it's your choice. It's your story. So,
all right. Well, my real goal in terms of what I try and do is I talk about service, and I really try to serve people through the gift of our voice. And I think if we use our voice well, then we can serve others. But that is really my route. So 15 years old, started pot washing in a Beefeater steakhouse. And then from that went into various parts of hospitality, studied hospitality management in Leeds, and then went through a fairly different path on hotels and ended up in York, which is where I am now, to manage the Marriott Hotel as a general manager. So that was my last paid corporate job, 142 bedroom hotel, a couple of million-ish turnover, and it was great. But hotel ship is very, very hard. You're working when everybody else is playing, and as family were in plans, I thought, do I really want to be a hotel manager working weekends, Christmas, Easter, when actually that isn't congruent with perhaps my purpose? So I left that and then founded a conference and events company, did that for 14 years, caught a bit of a cold. Well, let's just say a massive virus with cash flow, and folded that company. Then went into telemarketing to coaching, which is kind of where I am now.
Okay, right. So hospitality to telemarketing is an interesting one in itself, isn't it? Let's start then with the coaching piece and how you specifically ended up doing what you're doing now, because I think that I can maybe see the thread there, but I'd love to hear it in your words.
All right, well, telemarketing. So from hotels to conferences, we started doing conferences. And as part of that, we actually started selling exhibitions and events and tickets for people. And that meant we needed to have a telemarketing team to do that. Then it turned out that actually they couldn't always work on that. So we then started doing appointment setting for small businesses and companies. And that actually seemed to be more popular than some other routes. So telemarketing team grew, and that started to get me curious on selling. And what I found is that we would give people like yourself, David, some gifted appointments to go and speak to the people that you wanted to speak to. And then we'd say, how did the appointments go? And they'd say, well, didn't go so well, actually. And then they'd almost put the mirror back on us to say, you gave us a bad appointment. And then we would say, but you gave us the data. We've given you an appointment to the people you wanted to speak to. And that got me curious about what was going wrong. So then I started coaching more on the sales process of qualifying the lead, doing good discovery, proposal. And that made me think more about coaching. But I actually veered off to a whole different direction, which was to coach midlife men on midlife crisis, because I found myself going through that. And I wanted to serve an audience based on some of the pain and tribulations that I've been through. But actually, I found that quite a hard game to play. I call it claps without coins. People would say, great, Chris, what you're doing. Really need more people like you because of midlife adversity. But then you say, hey, David, do you want to make a deal? And you might say, do you know, my Harley Davidson looks much more attractive. And I wouldn't manage to get money from the claps. So that was last May. I had a walk on a beach in Anglesey and decided to literally draw a line in the sand and said, when I cross over that line, I am no longer going to be serving these midlife men. I'm actually going to go back to my sales route. So I now combine speaking with selling. That's where I am now.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, for most small business owners, I think anyone in the audience who is one, certainly I did, we recognize a lot of those challenges. I think, yeah, that lead generation bit, that bit at the beginning of the story of the business and getting a customer in, I still struggle with that. I always have. I've never understood it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's like witchcraft. I don't know.
But unfortunately, they don't sort of magic up and bang on your door and say, hello, David, I'd love to come and work with you. Well, sometimes they do through recommendation referral. But even recommendation referral, you have to be specific to ask sometimes for people to be recommended or for people to recommend them to you. It is part of the adage of small business that you need to keep on poking the fire and put coal on the steam. You know, it's or the other way around. Yeah.
Coal on the something. Yeah. In the old steam train.
Yes.
I like that metaphor. It's a good one. Yeah. And so, I mean, the midlife men thing, do you think there was an issue there with there's a lot of stigma and kind of preconceptions attached to those sort of issues? Do you think there's a challenge with men having to admit first they need help before they even consider spending money on something like that?
Yes, in a short answer. But I think it's a multi-layered answer to that based on all matter of things, whether it be society, where we find ourselves now as men, cultural, all kinds of different aspects. And it could be generational from grandfather to father to where some of those men are now. But when you look at the stark reality of the statistics, the men that we're losing, either through illness or through taking their own lives, it's tragic. And yet it's not something that men seem to want to wake up and deal with. But I don't really want to go into it too much because I spent an awful lot of time in that space. And I sort of said to myself, like I said, on that metaphorical line in the sand, I am kind of done with this, but it's weird because now I am working with people directly on selling. Sometimes they'll say, hey, I've got a problem with relationship or sleep or nutrition or energy. And all the work that I did on some of those key quotients now come into some of the aspects that I coach on. And in fact, I changed my framework to now be the SERVE framework, which is the mechanics of sleep, energy, relationships, visualization, and the last one. This is so good today, isn't it? The last one is exercise. Yes, of course. In terms of the 5 mechanics of what makes a good human.
Appreciate it. I don't want to push you back over your line in the sand. So I respect that. But I think you're right there in the way that all these things are interconnected, especially when you're dealing with like the solopreneur type, the small business owner, that sort of person. I think there is a societal, there's a cultural thing around that where we're almost expected to make what we do like that is our identity, and everything else is either like subservient to it or left at the door. That's the other analogy, isn't it?
I know we're talking a lot today, David, about that word purpose. Mm-hmm. And even the word purpose, where is the real purpose driving you from? Is it from an inner purpose of what you really believe yourself? Or is it a purpose that's been delivered to you by blinkers or societal pressure or expectations of others that you are living, working, or serving? In terms of that purpose and that energy, what is really driving you? Are being driven from an internal reason or dragged as a result of what society expects you to be doing as a man, female, person, whatever gender you might be, to conform to this planet that we seem to be living on?
Yeah, and or even like as a business owner, like there's certain expectations there as well. And I think that's kind of what I was alluding to is it's not that simple. Like, and even if you're not a business owner, if you're an employee in a workplace, and we've all had managers who've been like, work isn't the place for feelings, you leave those at the door kind of thing. Mm. And I think where I see it, and it's relevant to leadership, it's relevant to what you've been talking about, it's relevant to business owners as well, is you can't just leave it at the door. It's not that simple. You've got to consider the whole person. And I think the best leaders out there are the ones who are able to do that, and they can make sure things get done, but they can also still support that entire person.
Yeah, and I don't know whether we've got what we call best leaders. We were at an overseas place the other day, and there was a picture on the wall of Richard Branson, and then to his right was Mandela, to his left was Desmond Tutu, in the back was Kofi Annan and others. And we both looked at the picture and just went, wow, look at the human beings in that picture. And then we both said, is the modern day leader, politician, statesman, whatever it is, representative of those kind of figures? Or was I just getting a bit old and crusty thinking, well, that's not the same as it used to be?
It depends on the field, I suspect. I try to avoid politics.
I do too. I
usually fail, but I always try. I think that's one where the answer is probably, yeah, they're not as good as they were. But it's so difficult, isn't it? Because even trying to think back to like past ones within your own lifetime, you're always going to have that sort of the rose-tinted hindsight, aren't you? And it's very difficult to be objective about that answer.
Yeah, and I think history also then turns as the pages, and as the pages turn, the highlights become the things that we remember. And yet Winston Churchill, he was not a successful leader first time around. And then as he became a war prime minister, he then became the statesman and the stoic leader that we needed to have that clarion call of fight on the beaches, we will never surrender, etc., that became something iconic. But first time around, he wasn't actually a good political leader. But the pages of history say he was one of the best.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of election results, I don't know off the top of my head, but I don't think he was that great. Like,
no.
I mean, he was voted out almost immediately after the war as well, wasn't he? So
yeah, and we're living in a very different time, but it could be that the pages of history in 50, 100 years goes back and looks at this particular moment in time as something that was transformational for future peace and prosperity of the world. We just don't know, because right now we're only in the present moment of where we are, and it feels a little bit, oh, this is a bit weird changing, but in 100 years' time, it's just another little pinprick of our journey through the planet that we live on.
I mean, I hope so. That's the only good outcome at this point, isn't it? Like the other options, it's all a bit doom and gloom, isn't it?
Well, it depends on what you look at. I'm very much a glass half full kind of person, but as we said, I don't want to go into the political oblivion of black hole of which particular country, politician, space program is the right one at the moment.
Yeah. No, I think that's wise. The point does stand in other areas, though. I mean, obviously, politics is the easy one to talk about because everyone knows it. But I think even in like the lifetime of a business, as an employee, you look back, I think you'll still have that hindsight issue comparing like the first manager you had when you joined the company to the one you have today 5 or 10 years later, if you've stayed that long, which most people don't, but that's another issue. And they're never going to measure up.
You do remember those managers, leaders, bosses, however you want to call them, and the welfare or the satisfaction of your daily grind is often dependent upon the leader, boss toxicity that you are working under. And it's down to the personality characteristic traits of that particular person that is in charge. And that's still sometimes sad that people can be going through curves of amazing, fantastic, happy clappy because the leader portrays that. Then the leader moves on and the new person wants to put their iron fist on the culture of the business, and suddenly everything changes. And you're like, well, what happened? I was fine 3 years ago, but now I literally can't face going into the office because I'm worried that every single piece of my behavior is going to be scrutinized like I'm a 4-year-old child again.
Yes. It's an interesting phenomenon, that one, isn't it? The way, and I think, I mean, you see it at like the CEO level because that's often consciously, explicitly why they've been brought in, is to make a change. But I think any new leader, especially when they're stepping into the shoes of someone else who's recently left or moved up, there's that subconscious almost desire to kind of draw a line in the sand, which come up again, and sort of show that you are different but better somehow. And often that's quite a difficult bar to meet. So it ends up just being, well, different is good enough. We'll worry about the better bit later. And I think that explains a lot of that sort of issue in a lot of businesses. It is an interesting one. And I think you hit the nail on the head right at the beginning of that answer there as well, because this is, to me, why leadership is so important for managers, for bosses. Don't like the word bosses, but that's just me. Because, I mean, we spend most of our lives at work. Everyone in that room is there for whatever reason, but it's ultimately for the paycheck. Yes, purpose, yes, belief in the goal, all of that is becoming more important now. But a lot of people still, it's because they need to keep the roof over their heads. They need to be able to feed the kids and so on. And so in that context, there's less choice, I think. And that to me makes leadership a responsibility. It's not a right, it's not a privilege, it's a responsibility, because, as you say, that you as the leader, you are setting the tone of that organization. You are deciding by your actions whether all of the people in that room can show up and have a good day, look forward to coming to work, don't take any stress home with them, or they're waking up with a headache on Sunday evening or whatever because they're dreading going into work tomorrow.
But equally, from the employee perspective, I do think sometimes there is a lack of awareness of exactly what it means to be the founder, the owner, the leader. And I know sometimes, you're waking up on the 28th of the month thinking, I don't know if we're going to make payroll or tax. And that shame or guilt or responsibility, thinking I'm 3 days away of not being able to meet the needs of you, as you said, putting a roof over somebody's head. And sometimes the employee don't actually fully understand all the ramifications of cash flow, and one bill could be the difference between making payroll or not. And that sits on the shoulders of leaders very heavily sometimes, and that some of those responsibilities can lead to some very self-persecuting behaviors as well. And then in
Absolutely.
bigger businesses, you've got regulatory control, you've got shareholders, investors, and the leader is sometimes squeezed between the top, breathing down on them to make more EBITDA or whatever that metric might be. And then the employee is asking for welfare, social responsibility, increases of payroll, and the leader's stuck between a rock and a hard place, wondering, well, which way should I turn? And sometimes they've just got to be a big fire blanket between the heat from the top and the heat coming from the bottom. And sometimes you're going to find holes in that fire blanket and they're going to snap, regrettably.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And I think that's what makes the job so difficult, isn't it? It is those competing priorities that, especially if you're in middle management, where you're literally like pressed by the fullest weight from both directions. But yeah, I do think there's not enough like of that vulnerability and that honesty with people, because I think in most situations, if you share these concerns and these challenges with employees or people in your team or whatever you want to call them, colleagues is my preferred word, but they're not going to say, okay, well, that's your problem, I'm quitting. I mean, if they do, some might, maybe, but I don't think like the large majority will. Certainly not if you've done your job well as a leader up to that point. You're probably going to be met with understanding and how can I help and that sort of approach. And that might take the stress off a little bit. And I think too many managers, leaders, founders, for the reasons that you said, I mean, because it's perfectly human reaction. It becomes very self-critical. You get stuck in your own head. You go around that sort of negativity spiral and, oh God, if I tell people they're going to quit or they'll stop work until I can pay them or whatever, and it'll all fall apart. And then that very quickly becomes self-fulfilling because you keep the secret, you feel guilty about keeping the secret, so probably in some way you'll lash out in the wrong direction and then it all starts to fall apart around you.
Well, that keep the secret, let's just talk about that. And I not an advocacy of your service or my service in terms of finding a coach, but that leader is sometimes keeping lots of secrets because they don't want to admit failure. They don't want to admit weakness. They won't confide in the CFO or the CPO or the CMO to say, do you know what? I'm actually struggling here to try to find the right levers to pull in this business. They don't want to talk to the chairman because then that would also be a problem. They might not want to talk to the mates because the mates just have this picture of David on his white chariot, absolutely, nailing everything to the mast of success. Well, perhaps that's where coaching could become more of a support resource for people, as opposed to, I think still in the UK, we see coaching as the last resort, or, well, you might need to go and see the coach because it's the route to disciplinary, but we'll give you a coach just to make sure that we've shown you that actually we care about you, but really we don't because you're going to get fired anyway.
Yeah, I think the same is very true of leadership development a lot of the time. It's like you've made like a monumental mistake. You've been caught doing something you shouldn't have been doing, or we've had like 50 complaints about your leadership, so we're going to send you on a training course. That solves the problem. Or as you say, it's just the final check mark before we get rid of you.
Or we'll do a nice psychometric. Let's not get too cynical about all these things. But yeah, sometimes I think it's an outward facing retrospective view of development as opposed to this is us. This is all the things that we do to enable you to be the best leader possible. What else do you need in order that you can carry on performing and leading and developing yourself to make sure that you're the leader of the next generation, as opposed to just being the best now? Because we all know that you get to a point and then you can only develop yourself. I think you have to continually work on continuous development, and that has to come sometimes through an external resource.
Absolutely. I mean, from my aerospace years, it's like the difference between preventative and corrective maintenance, right? So corrective, you don't do anything about it. You don't have to spend anything until something breaks, and then you just pay to fix it. In the short-term mindset, that's cheap because you don't have to spend anything right now. Whereas preventative, you have to spend now, but it might stop something from breaking in the future. So it's a long-term view. Right now it's more expensive, but over time it will be cheaper in general. And I think that's exactly the same mindset here. Well, whether we're talking about personal development, leadership training, mindset coaching, any of these things, do it before you hit the wall, and then it will be cheaper and less stress for you in the long run.
Or find out why you hit the wall and then do a root and branch inquisition as to why. There's a great book called Black Box Thinking, I think, and it interrogates why the aeronautical industry is so fantastic at working out where failure has come and then how they stop it from happening again, versus things like the criminal justice system or the medical profession. And it comes down to culture. When an aeroplane goes down, it's cataclysmic. It's not just a problem. The pilot goes down, the crew go down, and also the passengers. And therefore, the vested interest to get everybody on board to find out what went wrong is everywhere and fully transparent. And most importantly, there is nobody really responsible because it's a collective agreement to fix. Whereas in a medical profession, where a surgeon makes a mistake or the nurse perhaps prescribes the wrong thing, it's then a witch hunt and well, it wasn't me. He gave me he gave me the scalpel and he told me to remove the right atrium. Well, did you check? Well, she told me, and therefore it's her fault. And it's a different mechanic of blame, but most importantly, culture that creates the continuous desire for improvement, which is now why we have hardly any airplanes that fall out of the sky. Admittedly, they do happen, and I'm not trying to create doom for anybody flying on a plane today, but it's the safest way of transportation because they go really, really, really deep on check, 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 good to go.
Yes, it's possibly not as transparent as we would like to believe.
Oh, okay.
But yes,
it was a good book.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's a good comparison, and the reasons of it behind it. It's because of, I guess, the history of aviation. It's always been high profile. If something goes wrong, there's a lot of people all at once, and it's, barring a natural disaster, it's usually that's going to be like the highest casualty event you'll see in the news, isn't it? So I think that's part of it, is that it's the reputational risk to the big companies, the people making the aircraft, to the airlines and things like that. Whereas, comparing that to the legal system, for example, it's at best, it's a few individuals, isn't it? And not to say it won't be life-changing, but it's a question of scale, I think. And I think maybe that's why people don't feel the pressure. And there's probably different histories as well in legal fields as well. And medicine, I don't know. Don't know enough about that one. No comment.
We're covering some ground today, aren't we?
We are, aren't we? We've gone wildly off topic already, but it's all good. It's interesting. So, let's bring it back to that P word. We mentioned purpose, didn't we? There's loads of famous books out there about that. In the leadership field, probably the most well-known at the moment is going to be Simon Sinek and Start With Why and that whole approach there. From your perspective, why is it such an important thing, and how do we do it if we haven't got a clue? Because a lot of people don't. You get out of education, you get your first job, you never think about it.
Well, I honestly think I'm very, very privileged, lucky at the moment, because I do say every day is like Christmas, because I wake up and I cannot wait to get on a call with somebody and say, hey, David, what's going on today? How can I help? What you're stuck with? And then from that, they elicit a problem, a breakdown, or a behavior that they want to fix. And then through the power of question, technique, and self-discovery, we find a pathway to joy or a pathway to better performance. And it's just such a unique human thing that we like to try to help people through adversity. And I get to do that on a paid basis every single day. And if you're not working in a place where you feel like you're working in Disneyland or Father Christmas, then that for me is a need to find your purpose.
Fair enough. So, having identified the problem, then what? How do you do it? Is it like the light bulb moment, or?
Well, it took me 55 years. So I'm not saying that it was an easy process, I think it's just a constant pursuit of being curious. But the hardest thing, I think, is knowing that there's something calling you and then not reacting to the stimulus. And what's the great quote from Viktor Frankl, I think? There's the gap between stimulus and response is what defines us as human. And it's how quickly you make that decision between stimulus and response that will create momentum for you. And when you're waking up on a Monday morning and you've got that sick feeling in your stomach about the place or the people or the environment or the culture or the boss that you're being dictated by, the longer you continue with that, the mirror of accountability I'm saying is on you. It's not the people, it's not the boss, it's not the culture. You've decided to be a part of that. And the longer you stay with it, it's your decision. I know that sounds great, Chris, but I have to put the roof over my head. I have to pay the bills. Yes, you do. But how long do you want to carry on playing the same tune on the keyboard? And what's it going to take before you come off that? And often you find people jump off the end of the gangplank because they got pushed, something happened that was a life correction, or something just made them jump off. But it sometimes is a really serious life threatening or life change that makes people go to a different career structure or calling. And my challenge to you is, why not? Why is now not a good time to try? Because often the fear of failure or the fear of, well, what if, isn't nearly as bad as the fear of finding out in 10 years' time that you're still in the same place as you were 10 years ago.
Yeah, I definitely, what's the phrase? I resonate with that. There's always going to be reasons not to do it, right? And it's very easy. And, the mortgage is the classic one, paying the bills, keeping the roof over our heads. And I understand that. But I also spent at least 5 years in exactly that situation. I had that exact feeling at the time. Like, I knew, there were aspects of it that kept me going, probably, like the people being one of those, or some of the people. But the work itself, like the stress from the boss, the stress of what we were trying to do and how difficult and ultimately unachievable it turned out to be. And you just, I knew at least like 4 or 5 years before I left, like I'd reached that point and it was right. Look, I know this isn't going to work for me, at least. They might achieve wonderful things, but, this isn't for me anymore. But I kept going because of all of these reasons that it's easy to tell ourselves. And the only thing that knocked me out of it, there were two quite like disruptive events that happened, one of which I was personally involved in, one I wasn't. And those were like, the first one was a bit of a wake-up call, but I was like, okay, this is probably an outlier. I'll set that aside. Again, like, you can rationalize anything if you try. But when the second one, I think that was like, probably because it affected others instead of me, that for me was more of an eye-opener. And it was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. This is my line in the sand. And I didn't really look back since. And now, okay, some months, not recently, thankfully, but some months, there is a genuine concern. Am I going to be able to meet the mortgage this month? Can I afford the nice food this week, or are we having a pot noodle again? But that pales in comparison in terms of the scale of the stress it causes, and the offset against doing something that I genuinely believe in, that I love doing, and I enjoy the work, I enjoy the people. Like, all of the boxes are ticked with what I do now. And it's, for me, it's no comparison. I would far rather that small problem and occasionally than those like daily painful stresses. Anyway.
And sometimes it's also good to be aware of exactly where we find ourselves. We're both in an environment now. We've got electricity. We've probably got heating. We've got technology, Wi-Fi. I've just been to a developing country, and there was a gentleman going down a small alleyway, whipping his mule, taking rubble from one point to the other. And he had the best, cheesiest, hugest grin on his face with about 2 teeth. And I just looked at this guy and just thought, that is happiness personified. All he's got to do is get down that passageway with the rubble, take it from point to point, and at some point today, he's going to find enough food, water, whatever it is, to live in a place that he considers shelter with those that are important to him, that are his family. And it was just such a simple vision of happiness. And there was other people, tut-tutting because the wheels nearly rolled over their foot, or the Wi-Fi wasn't working, or the taxi hadn't quite turned up. And then in the airport, it was Ramadan, and the whole airport literally shut at 10 to 7 because everybody was they were breaking the fast. And they therefore wanted to drink and eat because they hadn't been doing it since 4:00 that morning. And there were people at the checkouts going, well, is there anybody here going to help me? And I want to have my pizza margarita. And sometimes you just need to take a step back and go, am I really actually in need of all the things that society says I really need today? Because somebody else somewhere has probably had a great day without all the trappings of things that you think you should have to have today.
Yeah, it's a great point. The thing with purpose and happiness as well, I think, is it almost doesn't matter what it is as long as it's enough for you, right? And it's for you is the key part of that. It's not letting outside viewpoints define what that means for you. And I think that, particularly in Western society, I think that's where we're going quite wrong these days. We're getting on the soapbox again, aren't we?
No, but you could find yourself in a position where you are in a fairly tyrannical leadership, where the boss is that person, he, she is making your life very difficult. And it could be that you find your purpose through another calling, which could be community, it could be giving, it could be charitable. And you just bookend the day to say, I need to survive 9 till 5 to do what is necessary to put the food on the table, to keep the roof over my head. But come 5:30, I am the community caregiver, litter picker, church leader, whatever it might be, because that serves my heart and that is me fulfilling my purpose. So purpose doesn't mean to say that you need to just let go of everything and suddenly jump off the cliff to say, this is the new thing I'm going to take flight on. It could just be that you find balance by pursuing things that give you that oxytocin, dopamine tick, whilst pursuing something that isn't quite in keeping with your natural self.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely. You have to work, but your work doesn't have to be your purpose. And it could be anything else. Yeah, absolutely. Totally with you there. But again, I think that's where we get tied up, isn't it? Like the social media posts and things. And, and maybe we are quite fortunate because work and purpose can be the same for us. But
yeah. And interestingly, I was in this country as well. And I said to my partner, do you know what? There is literally no place for a speaking, presenting skills coach in this place right now. I am not needed. I need to learn how to plant trees, grow cherries, pick walnuts, drive a mule, and put concrete blocks on top of each other with a minimum amount of mortar. That's life. And it was a real leveler to show that what I consider to be a skill set in this country is not a skill set in another.
I've been known to refer to leadership as a universal skill, but now I'm questioning that.
Well, there was innovation required. There was a little mountain village, and the innovation was get van from village to city, find tourists, bring van with tourists to mountain guides, allow the mountain guides to walk them around, drop them off at uncle's restaurant where they have lunch, get van, take them back to city again. That was, it was a perfect little ecosystem of connected innovation to create new welfare and prosperity for them. Whether or not they needed leadership for that, don't know. But it was a perfect example of how people can capitalize on the way that the world works to create new revenue, new benefits to a world that actually hadn't seen it before. But then here was the scary thing. I sat down for lunch with Mohammed, who was the guide. And I said, tell me about what's going on. And he said, well, the first thing I worry about is snow, in that for the last 4 years, we have no longer seen snow in this village at all during winter. And we would have seen it for every year that I've lived up until 4 years ago. And then the other thing he said is he picked up his device, his phone, and he said, the other thing is this. Now in our family homes, there's no conversation when I come home from a day's guiding because everybody is looking at this, scrolling on WhatsApp and Instagram and looking at the life they think that they might want. And the future generations are leaving the mountain villages in search of this promised land. And he said he's really worried that the world that he lives in is not going to be there either through climatic change or technological change. And that was me sort of going, wow, did Mark Zuckerberg ever imagine that that platform would have such a demonstrative effect on a place that he never even knew about?
Yeah, it's a weird one, that, isn't it? I mean, no has to be the answer, doesn't it? Of course he didn't.
No.
Who knows? Only he can answer. Yeah, to me, the more interesting question is if he had realised, would he have done anything differently? But that's maybe we're not going to answer that one.
Well, you can always invite him to your podcast, Dave, and ask him that. I'm sure he'll turn up.
I'm sure. Yeah, I might do that just for a joke, but I doubt he'll respond. Anyway, we're talking around career stuff here as well as the purpose, and there's the happiness side as well, which comes out from most of this conversation, actually. So if we bring it back into the workplace again just for a moment, do you see any role for leaders in helping their people who are struggling with some of these issues in terms of getting the most out of their career or finding their purpose or happiness even? Yes.
The compassionate, empathetic aspect of leadership is a key part of what I think is going to drive a team to be successful. And I've just listened to a few podcasts, and there was Vin Guang talking about it on Stephen Bartlett. And he said, have the high-low buffalo conversation where we don't just say, hey, how are you? We talk about what's high for you this week, what's low, and also what's something that you do in your spare time. And then I heard somebody else advocating how we should talk to leaders from a sales perspective. And it was, they haven't got time for this, they haven't got time for that, just get to the point. And I was thinking, well, actually, they're just as human as I am. And if we give leaders more time to actually ask the inquisitive questions and be compassionate, empathetic, but also the leader, I think, has to have a place where they are curious. They're on the floor. They're in the business. They're asking the questions that are insightful and deep, but also saying to their foot soldiers, whoever the people are that are in their direct line report, I don't want to talk about EBITDA. I don't want to talk about profit. I don't want to talk about KPIs. I want you to tell me what's the mood of the business today. What's the thing that's annoying people? And I want to go to where those conversations are happening and not be afraid of being challenged or being made to feel uncomfortable. Because I think sometimes we sugarcoat leaders to only see the things that they want to see, and they miss the things that they could or should be seeing that would actually galvanize them and galvanize the business to be a better version of where it is now. But we almost protect them because we have this vision of them being in the ivory towers that we can't allow them to see what they should really be seeing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, those two podcasts that you mentioned there, to me, that shows two very opposing views of what leadership is about. I don't have a lot of time for that whole leaders are really busy, they don't have time to think or ask questions kind of mindset, because especially when it comes to interacting with the organization you're leading and the people within it, because to me, that's your job as the leader. Like, what else are you doing that's more important than that?
Going back to Simon Sinek, where we started, was what's the real definition of a leader? And we skirted around manager, boss, leader. And of those three, they're three very different individuals. A manager is somebody that is doing probably what has been instructed to do them on a daily basis. A boss is somebody that thinks they've got the right to tell everybody what they're doing because of title or because of position or because of stature. A leader, that's a whole different word for a whole different character, in my view, as to what makes somebody a leader. A leader could be a professional community football volunteer leading a group of 14-year-olds out to be brave and challenge resilience and challenge the referee not to be castigated or called bad names by parents. That's leadership. But we wouldn't define that as leadership in the context of perhaps the way we're talking about leaders.
Yeah, I know, I agree. So there's a quote, I'm just trying to remember who it was. I think it was, I want to say like Admiral Grace Hopper. It was an American admiral anyway. I think that was her name. But she talked about the difference between leadership and management, about managers are just, they manage things, they oversee stuff, whereas leaders, it's all about the people. And I think that's the difference for me, which makes most sense anyway. As for boss, I think to me that has a really negative connotation. It's about that sort of person, is exactly as we're talking about. Like, I don't have time for this. What do you want? Give me a quick answer. That's it. Yeah, and just go and do that. I say jump, you say how high. Do as I say, not as I do. All of these sort of really old-fashioned understandings of how it is to like be responsible for people. And to me, that's not leadership. When it comes to leader and manager, I think those are two different, very different skill sets. But I think in the modern world, in the modern workplace, if you're going to be in charge of people, in inverted commas, you need to be able to do both of those things. You've got to be able to do the leadership stuff to get the people inspired and bought into the vision, whatever that may be, and to actually show up and enjoy what they're doing. Because, you know, there's plenty of studies out there that show happiness at work, enjoying their job means better productivity, better results. So as a manager, you want that. But as a manager, you also need to be able to do the admin stuff, because in this day and age, with all the technology all these businesses rely upon, if you can't do the boring, again in inverted commas, then you're not going to be able to lead a team either. So it's, people talk about it in the context of either or, and I think it's both or neither. And the neither would be you're not getting the job, someone else will have it. Anyway, maybe that's oversimplifying it, and maybe that's a bit too brutal. I don't know, but that's what I think.
Well, there's challenge also for, I think, what we would say middle management, whatever that is. They have a really tough job, I think, because the leader, let's say that, you know, the C-suite individuals that are running a big business, they have the art of delegation in that they can push everything down and actually, given a good wind, probably have also got then free time to be strategic, to have a big view of a helicopter and see where the business is and where they need to hover in and drop down and then hover back up again. Whereas the middle manager is trying to lead a siloed part of that business through leadership, but also they have to manage the payroll, the rota, the sickness, the KPIs, the customer satisfaction score. And that's quite a challenging area, because sometimes they'll look around and they haven't got anybody to delegate to, because the buck stops with them to do the risk report or do the compliance report or fulfill the obligations of the health and safety. And that's a difficult one, because you're trying to trade off leadership and management. You've got to lead in order for the business to go further forward and allow the team to get the best out of themselves. But also you've got to manage to make sure that risk mitigation of all the things that makes the business perform is also done correctly.
Yeah, and this is part of why I say, and I would apply it to any leader at any level as well, that they've got to be able to do both. Because I think, again, the temptation is for that topmost leader to just focus on the bit they find exciting, which is usually like talking about the vision and the strategy and all that sort of stuff. And then they just delegate the admin down because they don't want to deal with it. Which the result of that is you have, as we've talked about already, really highly stressed middle managers. and just to add another wrinkle to those middle managers is leadership, I don't think, is exclusive to that top level of an organization. I think anyone at any stage there needs to be, or should, or could be a leader. And so for the middle managers, that quite often means they've got to be leading upwards as well, because they're the ones who see what's happening on the ground at the coal face, and they've got to apply those leadership skills in both directions sometimes to get the detached top leader who doesn't really know what's going on to actually buy in and understand what's needed for the people who are doing the work. So it's
Yes.
it's not an easy job, that middle level manager.
No, and sometimes particularly sometimes I'm working with a sales team, and you find that the best performing sales development representative becomes the account director, that then becomes the business development director, and suddenly they're the sales director. And the thing that they most love, which was talking to customers, winning deals, and getting the euphoria of a win, and then suddenly they are doing payroll, rosters, reports, shareholder agendas, and they're so removed the thing that was really their purpose, which is having the thrill of the chase. And why do we put people into leadership when suddenly sometimes we're putting, what's the phrase, square pegs in round holes?
Yes. Yeah, and it's weird, isn't it? Like, there's never that question, like, would you like a promotion? Do you want to be in a leadership position? It's just like there's that starting assumption of, yes, everyone wants it. We don't need to ask that question. Of course they do.
You're so right. You're so right. That's the conveyor belt of life, isn't it? Everybody assumes we want to take a step up onto the next rung, but actually some people are just quite happy doing what they're doing. Like that donkey person I was talking about, he was just so happy, just going down the street, clip-clopping along, sun out, just doing his thing.
And I mean, for most people, it probably would still be a yes, because it's tied to that better paycheck, isn't it? But I think salespeople are the exception there, aren't they? Because potentially, if they go up a rung, they lose access to that commission, and that's the majority of their earnings a lot of the time. And the base salary might be better, but I bet their total earnings aren't.
Or the quality of life that they have to do every day, meeting the obligations of many different facets on their dashboard, as opposed to, did I hit target?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it's not often I have empathy for salespeople, but that's definitely one occasion where I do.
Well, hallelujah, I've awoken your mindset to having some empathy for the pariah.
I jest, obviously, but yeah. Well, Chris, I know we're about to hit your deadline, so I've got one question left, which everyone has to answer. It's not optional. So hopefully you will have a quick answer.
Depends on the question.
Yeah, so it's leadership heroes. This is my favourite question, which is why everyone gets it.
Leadership heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, but could be anyone you could think of, live, dead, past, present, real or fictitious, but someone who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership. So who would it be for you, and why?
I've always mentioned him slightly, and that would be Mandela.
Okay.
For a person that was incarcerated for 27 years, to come out of that situation with a feeling of acceptance, encouragement, and enjoyment for life, and then to take the challenge onto his country to then lead them into such amazing change, I just think it's the antithesis of leadership, in that he was able to walk away from something that was potentially traumatic, and he could have taken that as an opportunity to marginalize or pour scorn on those people that created that environment for him. But instead, he decided to use that as an opportunity to create change. And that, for me, is the definition of great leadership, where you lead despite your situation, not because of it.
Yeah, he is a great example. One of my favourite quotes on leadership came from him, but it's too long to repeat now. But I think, yeah, you're so right. It would have been so easy after all that time and the circumstances that led him into that prison time as well, to come out of that being embittered and vengeful and all those nasty things. And he took completely the opposite road. Has to have been consciously, I think. Like, there's no way that was an accident. I don't know, maybe it was just a really nice prison. Probably not. And the way that he then did it as well, like the national level leadership and the way he was with people. I mean, there's so many examples. We could spend another hour talking about those alone, I suspect.
Has he come up before in any of your answers?
He has, yeah. He's come up a few times. I don't think he's in the top 5, though.
Okay.
But yeah, he's not the first time, so no bonus points, I'm afraid. Sorry. Yeah, but no, he's a good choice, and that's why he does come up.
All right. Well, it was either that or my dad, and I don't think you were to have a whole song and dance about my dad, but he was also one of my one of my leaders that I miss dearly, and I just think he was a great leader to our family, and also he was in GCHQ for many years as a pacifist at heart. That was what his mission was, is to be a pacifist, stopping conflict as opposed to somebody that could be creating conflict. That leaders come in many different vices, but if you had to ask me, it would be Mandela and my dad.
Well, fair enough. And you'll have to tell me more of that story another day. Chris, thank you so much for being with us. I know you need to go, so I will let you go. I do have your website details. I will be putting them in the show notes so everyone can find them easily. But yeah, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, David. And I always say to people, remember, you do only have one life. So love life, living your life, because there's no other ticket you're ever going to get.
Which is a great note to end on. Thank you. Thank you again, Chris, for your conversation today. Really enjoyed that one. And we went off on some weird and wonderful tangents. And hopefully any salespeople in the audience will see the fun I intended in my comment earlier, and you haven't taken it personally, because it certainly wasn't intended as such. But anyway, Chris, thank you again. Listener or viewer, if you would like to know more about Chris and the work that he does, if you are perhaps looking for a coach to help you with any of the things that he helps people with, you will find the link to his website as well as his LinkedIn profile in the episode description. So do check that out. Click on the links, reach out to him. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. And if any of the leadership challenges that we talked about today have struck a note with you, if you are one of those struggling middle managers, you're feeling that squeeze from your own leadership as well as that pressure from the people you're leading, and you just don't know how to get the best out of both, come along and join us at Integrity Leaders. It is the Leading with Integrity community. It is online first, online only. It exists to provide support to leaders like you, new leaders, new managers, first-time business founders and CEOs. The common thread for you will be a challenge in your leadership that you are facing during a moment of transition. So maybe you've only been at it for a year or two, maybe less. Either way, there is a raft of resources available there to help you out with the leadership knowledge aspects, as well as a supportive community, including myself, and regular events, and not to forget either the early access to these podcast episodes. So there's all sorts of things that you can get value from by joining the community. Do visit the website, and you're welcome to join anytime. You can click on the link also in the show notes, or visit www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk, where you'll find our main website. Has all sorts of things on there if you want to learn more before you join. But of course, there's that green button dotted around the place, which you can click on and go to the sign up page for the community. And if you have any questions about any of that, you want to have a conversation before you join, which is entirely fair enough, you'll also find links to my calendar, or you can send me a message on LinkedIn and we can arrange a chat anytime. Always happy to talk about leadership, as you all know by now, I hope. And on the subject of challenges that leaders face, next week on the podcast, we will be talking about imposter syndrome. And to help me explore that, I'm joined by leadership coach and imposter syndrome slayer, John Little. I hope you'll be with us again next week. And until then, thank you once again for listening and or watching. Put some thought into finding your purpose and be a leader, not a boss.
I'm all locked in, ready to go. Yes, yeah, just remember you're there, not here, where I keep on looking at you. You're there.
Okay, yeah, that's right. I've actually put the camera in front of the screen and it still doesn't help. I'm still all over here again.
I know. It's very difficult, isn't it? Because you want to have a conversation with David, but actually I'm having a conversation with your listener, which is that bloke woman up there. Yeah.
It's a tough one, that.